To the extent that we live our lives in a manner that is consistent with the truth in our heart, we thrive.
Welcome to the Meyer Clinics podcast, and you just heard a quote from one of your hosts, Dr. Lisa Day. Join our licensed clinical professionals from various backgrounds as they discuss fascinating mental health topics with a wide range of guests. Meyer Clinics is a Christian counseling organization with multiple clinics nationwide dedicated to treating the whole person, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. Welcome to our listening family. We thank you for joining us.
Hey everyone, Kristen Sananta-Walker here, and I'm on with clinical psychologist and registered nurse, Dr. Lisa Day. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Kristen. Happy almost Thanksgiving.
Almost Thanksgiving and after Halloween.
Right? We're headed into the holidays, an emotionally challenging time of year.
Yes, exactly. We need to do one on seasonal affective disorder.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I'm sure this would actually fit in with what we're going to talk about today, which is about teenagers and anxiety. So tell the listeners, what prompted you, obviously there are obvious reasons, but what prompted you to really want to bring up this topic?
Oh, absolutely. So, we all know that adolescents and teens are pretty challenging years. I don't know about you, but when I look back at my high school years, I don't look back at them as the most pleasant time in my life, just because
Right.
it's a natural time of, heading into puberty. Our hormones are going crazy, and where do we fit in? Where do we don't fit in? Are we in the clique? Are we out of the clique? And that changes on a daily basis. And so, we all know that anxiety in itself, as a symptom, is a pretty common symptom of the adolescent years. But what prompted me in wanting to about this today, Kristen, is that we're seeing anxiety now, like so many other mental health issues, at truly an epidemic level. And some studies are showing us that 1 in 3 teens between the ages of 13 and 18 are not only experiencing anxiety, but they are struggling with a bona fide anxiety disorder. And, this is a significant increase, again, since the introduction of social media, not to belabor that point. But it's epidemic. And so, really wanting to look at, not only that 1 in 3 kids are suffering with anxiety, but the admission rate for hospitalization for kids who are trying to kill themselves, suicide, is also at an all-time high. And so, the reason that I want to bring it is that if we've got 1 in 3 kids struggling with anxiety, and we've got admissions for suicide at an all-time high, what are we missing? What aren't we seeing? And to begin to explore the contributing factors, and then some of the things that we might be able to do as parents, family, coaches, friends, aunts, and uncles to support our youth of today.
Can you explain, just for the layperson, what's the difference between having some anxiety and a full-blown anxiety disorder?
I think that having anxiety is something that we're going to feel from time to time. So we can have performance anxiety, getting ready for a test or trying out for a sports team, and that would be some fluttering in the stomach, maybe some nervousness, maybe even some sleep challenges the night before. And we can talk about the various types of anxiety disorders. But when I consider it an anxiety disorder, what we're observing is the symptoms. So the uneasiness in the stomach, the difficulty sleeping, the racing heart beat, sweaty palms, sweaty hands, generalized feeling of discomfort. It's beginning to interfere not only, with our kiddos and their academic functioning, but really we're seeing it in their social functioning. And so, when it moves into the disordered range, we see interference with social and academic functioning. And then what we're seeing, if this is untreated, and research is showing us that 80%, up to 80%, we'll talk about why, but up to 80% of kiddos are not getting help for their anxiety. And so what we're seeing is that this is, interfering with academic performance, academic acceleration, them achieving the goals that they want to find in life. And then unfortunately, what we'll talk about, at another podcast, is that because these kids aren't getting help, they're finding it in the black market and on the streets. And that outcome is often deadly because that outcome is with what we're calling, Z bars, Xanax, and it's really a black market Xanax available on the street. So they're finding a way to get relief from the anxiety, but it's not through proper medication. So we're losing our kids. The level of anxiety is soaring. So when it's a disorder, it's interfering with their social and occupational functioning. And then we're losing these kids because of not getting proper treatment, many of which finding that treatment on the streets, and unfortunately, that not having a good outcome.
Mm. And that's frightening. We saw that, definitely a lot of anxiety doing our mental health summit with teenagers there. And thankfully, there, the state of Michigan high schools support talking about it, which, a lot of places, a lot of schools are still, mental health is on the back burner, or there's enough funding for them to talk about these things. So thankfully, there are some places that are bringing this into awareness so that there's an outlet in terms of your peers and your teachers and so on. But it's still, it feels like we're chipping away at something that's a runaway iceberg.
Oh, and absolutely. And even within the professional world, the clinicians, when we brainstorm, we have a think tank locally here that we're looking at how to best meet the needs of the youth in our valley. And the exact cause, narrowing down the exact cause in this surge in anxiety isn't really clear. I mean, certainly we have genetic components, we have brain chemistry components, we have individual personality, and then we have, the day-to-day stressors and what's going on in the home environment. And certainly there is so much pressure on our kids today to succeed. I look back at high school, and you were either on the volleyball team and swim team, and you went to football games, and really what I observed just having two kids, finish that high school experience is it's pressure about what school are you going to, and high school has become a time of preparing you for college. And there's that, assumed expectation that you're going to college. Well, what if you're not going to college? But there's still this pressure to perform. And, in fact, there was a survey done, and I can't recall the author. There's a researcher over at Stanford who's following this as well, but it looks at the preparedness, I can never say that, or really the level of anxiety or feeling overwhelmed with college freshmen. So there are folks coming right out of high school. And, we look at those measures, and back in 1985, back in the olden days, about 18% of college freshmen would say that they felt overwhelmed. So, about a fifth of them. And that's not unexpected because college is scary and it's change and you're moving into new locations. But studies last year, actually 2 years ago, showed that the levels had doubled. Over 41% of college freshmen are feeling completely overwhelmed going into college. And I know, I think I've shared this with you before. I have a senior in college, and she kind of casually shares with me from time to time, Mom, it's interesting. Everybody comes into college super excited as freshmen, and it's not uncommon by any means that during your freshman year, you withdraw, you go through substance abuse rehab, and then you re-enter in your sophomore year. And studies are showing us that 70% of that is from Xanax use. That in college, kids are finding Xanax as a means to get through the pressures of being overwhelmed, only to find that it's absolutely derailing them.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me too with it is the pressure is there on the students, but the parents are feeling it as well. And I'm not condoning any of the parents that just got caught up in the whole college admission scandal, but that is a symptom of what's going on. I mean, the pressure's there for the parents to get those kids into the right school too.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's so much, performance driven that as a psychologist, what I'm observing is that our kids are not emotionally prepared. So we are focused on how many sports teams are you on? How many AP classes are you in? Have you taken your SATs? Oh, your score's not high enough. Are you, applying to Ivy League schools? And that the pressure is so much on performance, that we're not teaching our kids resilience, coping mechanisms, problem solving. And so, these high expectations definitely are felt not only by the kiddos, but by parents. And this, Kristen, but I have a child now that we say, I'm not sure if she's taking a gap year or a gap life. And I chuckle with that, and I have great warmth in my heart. But it's interesting because every single parent says, where did she decide to go to school? And I said, oh, she's not in school. She's here with me. And it's always a pause. they don't really know how to respond, because expectations, in our culture as a whole, is that you're going to go to college, despite the fact that,
Yep.
fairly few people can afford it today. But the other things that we're looking at, when we look at causes, why this increase in anxiety, and you and I talk about this so much, but talk about the high expectations. And, the other thing that I guess, I don't know if it's become common, but we're so familiar with it now, of the school shootings, the big concert shootings,
Yep.
the terrorist attacks. And these aren't things that I never went to school wondering if, I guess we had bomb threats, but maybe once a year, in high school. But it wasn't,
Right.
that you were afraid that someone was going to bring a gun and go postal on your whole senior class. But
Right.
but the other impact, and this is the one, Kristen, that you and I think are both intimately involved with, is the mass impact of social media on anxiety.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that can, needs to be talked about ad nauseum, and it probably already is in some ways, but people just aren't getting it, how awful it is, or a lot of people aren't. And it's, what's interesting is it doesn't just affect our youth, it affects every single generation that's using it. The difference is we got years without it, and our kids didn't, if they're of a certain age. And so we're seeing how their brain chemistry has changed and how they're less set up emotionally the earlier they started the use of a smartphone and social media.
Well, you and I know, going to the barn, riding bareback, sitting in the, the
Mm-hmm.
stall with our horses and talking about, chasing critters around. And our kids, especially the Generation Z, they have no memory of life without computers and without technology.
Yep.
And, so they're brought up, human nature is competitive at its source, and there's definitely some assets to that. But what we're seeing with social media is that, the sense of self is determined by comparison, by competition, win loser, not I'm striving for, I'm either in or I'm out, I'm either good or I'm bad. And, that in, out, good, bad just fuels the ego. It doesn't fuel the development of self. So that comparison, that competition, you and I just did a podcast on FOMO, the fear of missing out. But I think that the biggest, the foundational thread that runs through that, with this generation is a significant loss of actual authentic connection. And, the impact that has on our mental, health and well-being, and our ability to problem solve and to be able to navigate this thing we call life, is profound. They're emotionally ill-equipped, and by no fault of their own, as they've been born into this,
Right.
generation, if you will, that is really interfering with connection.
And I feel, certainly there are generations where, in the 60s, the older generation did not appreciate the hippies, and there was so much conflict in that arena. So obviously every generation, has these issues, but it seems to me, just looking at it from an outside view, that the conflict between the generations is greater and greater. And a lot of that is due to older generations not understanding something that they didn't experience, which is, social media at that young of an age and smartphones and so on. And then the younger generation having even less patience than generations before them, because generations before them still had, the things that you're talking about, those life experiences outside of technology, that quick, rapid response that you get with social media and the internet and everything being accessible now, doesn't teach them how to wait for an answer, have patience, have understanding of how, problems get resolved over time. And so the divide is wider because of this, in my opinion, anyway.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And again, you and I have talked about the term, isolation of generations. And, I think that it's so poignant here because, in those differences, the parental generation, so those of us who are not Gen Zs, who've got kids who are finishing high school or in that area, when we see these kinds of anxieties, we have the bucket up, we see a social anxiety and we say, well, just deal with it. You need to go to school, right? Come on, let's go.
Right.
And so we have an expectation that they can just pull up their bootstraps and go to school because we're basing it on our experience of how we handled our level of anxiety through our development. And this break in being able to understand the magnitude of the anxiety that the kids are experiencing is causing more damage. I mean, I worked with a family back in Seattle, and they really said, their child definitely was a young man. He definitely had social anxiety, and the mom they were a wonderful, loving family, and she said, you got it, but you got to go to school. Get there, get on it, get up, get moving. This is unacceptable.
Right.
We go to school. And, they didn't realize that his anxiety was at the point where he was having full-blown panic attacks in school. He was,
Right.
not sleeping in anticipation of school. And unfortunately, and this is a drastic example, but that young man ended up taking his life. And I remember working with this family and, the mother saying, I had no idea. I didn't realize. Had I known the level of mental illness underlining his social discomfort as she saw it, but really a bona fide social anxiety disorder, I wouldn't have pushed him to go to school. I would have looked at getting a 504 plan, looking for something that's not for the neurotypical education. But because of that gap, that huge gap that we have, we're not understanding the magnitude of physical, emotional pain that these kiddos are experiencing. And that being said, we talk about anxiety all the time in the field of psychology, and even on many of our podcasts, we'll talk about anxiety and depression. But we have to realize that anxiety and anxiety disorders, they take on several different forms, and they are of several different intensities. And, so we can start with just the plain, straightforward, generalized anxiety disorder, which I believe certainly has a neurochemical component, but you throw in there the pressures, and you throw in there the social media, and you throw in there the push of the parents to comply or, to fit in and to move forward. And the anxiety is going through the roof. But then we also have obsessive compulsive disorder, which is a different diagnostic class. And we see that a lot, you and I, when we're going to talk about as digital distraction, right? Our kids, they're compulsively driven to their media, to their video games, to their technology.
Hi, this is Dr. Paul Meyer of the Meyer Clinics. Our Christian counselors across the country have a goal of helping all those who come to us to become what God has called them to be. If you're in a situation where you're not at peace within yourself, or you just feel like there's joy that's missing in your life, we can come alongside to help you obtain peace and joy.
This message is sponsored by the Meyer Clinic Foundation, a nonprofit Christian counseling ministry. The number is 1-888-7-CLINIC, 1-888-7-CLINIC.
And typically when we think of obsessive compulsive disorder, we think of, rapid hand washing. You can't stop washing your hands, or you got to go make sure all the lights are turned off. But where I'm seeing it in this population is really with media and digital. I cannot stay away from it. I'm compelled to hold my phone. Do an experiment at home, folks. Take your kid's phone. Just take it and place it somewhere else and see how quickly they move into a panic that device is removed. Now, is that diagnostic of obsessive compulsive disorder? No. But is that indicative of that compulsive drive to have that media in their hand? Absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, and that's not just kids. I have that with my own phone.
Right. Where is it?
Us too. Yeah. Where is it? Where did I leave? Literally even to just, leave one room to go to another room. Where's your phone?
Well, so much of our life is on the phone. We store it on the phone.
Exactly.
We access.
Exactly.
We theoretically access connection on the phone. I think for our age, I feel like, my pictures, my reference, my availability to get in touch with. Yeah. Well, and then there's, it's a bit of a paradox, so if you look at generalized anxiety disorder, we talked about social anxiety, which is super common, huge, made worse with social media. We've got phobias I have not seen change too much over the last decade, with the exception of maybe a bit of FOMO, the fear of missing out. So, phobias of not being included, but that hasn't changed that much. And panic attack, of course, we can see that through all of the anxiety disorders. But one that we don't typically think of, and it's a vicious cycle, is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is an anxiety disorder. But oddly enough, Kristen, you and I think about anxiety disorder, and I should probably quit including you in it. I should say I don't mean to be speaking for you. But I think of post-traumatic disorder as, having, been on the receiving end of sexual abuse or physical abuse. yeah, any of those kinds of things. But what we're seeing is this, vicious cycle where unmedicated or untreated kids with anxiety disorders are turning to, in one instance, they're turning to substances. And with that substance use, particularly the one we mentioned earlier, the Xanax abuse, they're experiencing trauma while under the influence, whether it's a date rape or a not date rape, or embarrassment, passing out, doing things they don't remember. And so they're developing PTSD from that. Also, we're seeing PTSD from the cyberbullying, and the other kinds of trauma that can take place. So it's really, it's frightening when you look at it like that we've got so many different diagnostic labels for anxiety, but then they're also interrelated, and if unaddressed, really are a ticking bomb. They just really are a ticking bomb.
And how do you even unpack, even with EMDR and many other treatment protocols, how do you unpack that which you experienced while under the influence?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? Because there's also what confounds those dynamics is guilt. You know what I mean? I shouldn't have. Here I'm in pain. I take Xanax. I pass out. I'm raped at a party. Do I talk to anybody about that? Maybe I deserved it. I shouldn't have done that. That was awful. So then I have lots more fuel for my anxiety, such as shame and guilt and self-hatred. So it's
absolutely.
And so when we look at, where, how do we know if our kids, have anxiety? We need to think outside the box. We don't typically, lots of parents who come in and say, my child has just, used this phrase, a mean-ager. They're just mean. They're irritable. They're agitated. They're short-fused. They're short-tempered. And we don't realize that in many kids, that's anxiety. That's the first symptom we're seeing of anxiety is irritation, agitation, withdrawal, isolation, in addition to the typical, racing heart or trembling hands or feeling the need to cry. But it doesn't present as we would typically think it would. And you throw trauma in there and that people can just downright shut down.
Right. Exactly.
One of the things a question that comes to me often is, when do we seek treatment with anxiety? And I think that, one of the things that I always look at with parents is that, and you and I have talked about this, is that it's very difficult for a parent to see their child struggle. And when we see our children struggle, unfortunately, our first attempt is to try to fix it. And we do that by, we want to talk away their social anxiety. We want to talk away their fear of not being included. We want to talk away their emotions. And, lots of times, looking at coming to terms with the fact that this isn't a typical anxiety. My kid really is not leaving the house. They are isolating, in their media, social media, or even books. They're just not developing normal social patterns. And, we find that they are, avoiding activities in school. The grades can drop. And this is what comes first, the chicken or the egg, is, that research shows us that most kiddos these days need about 9 hours of sleep. And our kids aren't getting it, so we've got, some anxiety is simply related to that cumulative chronic sleep deprivation.
Yeah. And I mean, I remember, sleep deprivation from sitting up and watching movies and, watching Showtime when it first came out and playing video games, but those were not interactive in terms of the bullying. And, that was just a one-way interaction, me watching something. Now it's back and forth. I mean, I think I've mentioned before, someone who's teenager, he and his girlfriend were never disconnected. The minute that she went home, after being together all day, the moment that she walked out the door to the car, they're on FaceTime, and then they're walking around the house all the way, all through the night on FaceTime together, and then going to school the next day. And I thought, my God, where is, this ability to just be plugged in like that all the time? It feeds that obsessiveness that comes with being a teenager anyway.
And what happens when you are not able to plug in? Yeah, you toss and turn, and you can't sleep, and you're missing something. But so I think with, one of my main reasons for wanting to talk about anxiety is really so we as the culture can understand that our kids are experiencing anxiety at a rate that is far greater than any of us have known, and that it is serious. And, oftentimes people will say, well, what do I do? And like I said, many of us want to try to talk our kids out of it, of, oh, just breathe, just get through the day. It's not that bad. And really, what I coach parents is that, we really want to begin to have heartfelt conversations and talk about the stressors that they're experiencing in school and not minimize them, not talk them out of it, right? So when they are anxious about not being invited to so-and-so's birthday party, to sit with it, to let our kiddos talk and help them look at how they can cope with it. Because our kids aren't learning how to cope with rejection. And, learning how to cope with rejection and learning how to experience failure are two huge components in resilience. And resilience is something that obviously as a culture we need to survive, but our teens need it, to be able to navigate through this difficult time. I also, tell parents, really be mindful, of the expectations that you're setting for your children. We want them to perform, but are we also supporting them in relaxing and in playing
Right.
and in being with friends, having downtime? We really can get lost in the, what did you do today? Especially those of us who are working parents. We work all day and we come home, what'd you do today? And it's almost that if they've just chilled with friends, we're like, oh, is that what you did today? What'd you get
Right.
done?
You're lazy.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And we also want to, and this is a tough one that we will all be, continuing to explore is, how do we talk to our kids about social media? Because as we know, it's been a part of their life since they came into this world and it's not going away. So how can we look at, what are breaks, what are digital free times, dinner, the whole concept of the family dinner in so many families has been lost. And part of that's because kids have activities in high school for sure, but part of that's because they're taking their food into the living room and watching TV, or they're sitting at the table and everybody's on their phones. And so, I say to folks, you've heard me say this before, Kristen, is that, one of the best things we can do for our kids' social anxiety is to get off our media. To set some boundaries
Oh,
with
yeah.
ourselves. Yeah. When I come home, am I then jumping on my computer and continuing to work, or am I taking it as a time that I can now catch up with my friends, or am I putting it down and really being there for my kids, for my family, for anybody? How available are we? The other thing we look, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, I was just having a memory as you were saying that of my son telling me, Mom, I see more of the back of your laptop than I do your face.
Oh, wow.
Because I was running, I was running a company. Not that that's an excuse, but I do remember him saying that. He was in about 8th grade, and I know another friend of mine who, she just won't get off her phone. I was shocked at how much she's on her phone, and she's got a little kid, a little kid with disabilities even, and well, he can't connect anyway. So, and I'm thinking, oh man, that's
Well,
a bad way to look at it.
Well, and how many parents put their kids on top of iPads, right? So here's a
Oh,
cartoon
yeah.
that will keep you distracted, and it seems oh, maybe it's educational, but again, it comes back to the, our mental health is directly related to the level of connectedness
That's
we
right.
have in meaningful life experiences. And those, I tell people, those are 3D. Those are in the real. You can smell them, touch them, feel them, see them. And, our kiddos, the 2-year-olds, I see them all the time. They're walking around with fake cell phones because they want to be like what they're seeing modeled. And so, getting
Right.
off them. But, I think that, in bringing it back around, the other thing that I just want to, really emphasize is that, while we're seeing 1 in 3 kids, who have anxiety disorders, and while, it's at an all-time high, with an 80%, 70% increase in suicidal thought and attempts, anxiety is very treatable. And, the key is being able to see it and then being able to get the proper help, because most research, if not all research, shows us that, cognitive behavioral therapy, where one can look at how am I thinking as it relates to what I'm feeling, or my emotions as it relates to how I'm interpreting things outside myself, and learning how to cope with those things that provoke us or trigger us. So cognitive behavioral therapy is phenomenally effective in learning how to navigate an anxiety disorder. In fact, I tell my clients that secondary to a neurochemical component, the single most powerful influence on your emotions are your thoughts. That what you think you become. Your thoughts create your reality. So if I'm thinking, I can't handle this, this is too much, I can't stand this, no one loves me, your anxiety is going to get worse. Whereas when we can teach healthier thoughts, resiliency, problem solving skills, coping mechanisms, such as this is challenging, and I'm going to sit down and look at how I might navigate through this. And I'm going to lean on my mother and father who are socially and relationally available because they're not on their media. And I'm going to talk to them about how to navigate through this rather than expect that I should know, or this isolation and loneliness. And so cognitive behavioral therapy is tremendously helpful. And then, that being said, we can't deny it all. And as you mentioned at the start of the program, it's worse this time of year, but SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, the Prozacs, the Zolofts, the Paxils, they have a place in our kids' anxiety. And I still, unfortunately, Kristen, I still think there's a fair amount of stigma to, just putting your kid on drugs. And the reality is it's not just, putting your kid on drugs, that there are a number of kiddos that are struggling with a neurochemical imbalance that responds phenomenally well to Paxil, to Prozac, to Zoloft. And so, knowing that cognitive behavioral therapy, knowing that medication therapy, but then, it always puzzles me that we forget the baseline stuff, the stress management stuff. And, I guess I'm pretty biased because I participate in it regularly, but more and more, encouraging our kids to try yoga, to try meditation. There's a plethora of meditation apps, and it doesn't need to be a spiritual Buddhist experience. It can be as simple as I breathe in, I know that I'm breathing in. And as I breathe out, I know that I'm breathing out. And I will teach that simple breathing exercise as a means to refocus, for kids who have social anxiety or performance or experiencing any kind of anxiety. And so, teaching just those simple dynamics are so important for kids. But then we have to realize too that, these things that we can do in the home are helpful, but there's definitely a time to refer for professional help, if it's interfering with their social or their academic performance. And then there are those kids who require a higher level with intensive outpatient treatment and even with residential treatment because the level of distress has become threatening to their life, meaning they've become suicidal. So I think that, in some, realizing that anxiety and the anxiety disorders in our youth are far higher and far greater than they ever have been in the history of mental illness in teens, knowing how to recognize it, and then knowing how to help our kids get the proper level of help that they need, and not believing that, this too will pass, it's just the hormones, the moon, or that they, got rejected, from their boyfriend, but that there's a disorder on hand. Yeah, there's a disorder here.
Well, I know, I'm not trying to do a commercial here, but we need to give people places to go. So I know Meyer Clinics has treatment for this at their Chicago location, is it?
Yeah, at the Chicago location, Meyer Clinics has the Breakaway program, which is an intensive outpatient program, a phenomenal intensive outpatient program. And it's basically a Monday through Thursday after school. So the kids don't need to be missing school. It's an adjunct to what they're doing. And, they do individual therapy, they do group therapy, they do parent groups, they do, family therapy, and learn these skills of how to navigate the challenges that our kids are experiencing today, trying to reduce the stigma, but most of all, giving them skills. And while, individual therapy alone is great for teens, what we're finding all over, in addition to the Breakaway program here in Idaho, we have what we call a think tank. And it's just several practitioners where we've gotten together to look at, we're missing the mark here. Our kiddos are dropping like flies. And we'll talk about this more when we talk about the Xanax epidemic in teens, but they're dropping like flies. And so it is an epidemic. It isn't something that's getting better, nor is there any indication that it will get better. So, certainly individual therapy, intensive outpatient therapy programs such as the Breakaway program are all going to be incredibly helpful in that they equip our kids with the tools that they're not getting or that they don't have, so that they can navigate this an amazing time of life and prepare them for adulthood.
Well, we're going to get into the medication, the self-medication piece in our next show. But for today, thank you, Dr. Lisa Day.
Thank you so much, Kristen.
And thank you, listeners, for tuning in to another episode of the Meyer Clinics podcast.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. Tune in next time for another engaging discussion on relevant mental health topics. If you have any questions about Meyer Clinics, please visit our website at meyerclinics.com. That's MEIER clinics.com, or call us at 888-7-CLINIC. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or any of your favorite podcast apps. And please note that we are a member of and produced by Mental Health News Radio Network, mhnrnetwork.com.